Thank you. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming to our event celebrating Zara Stone and Ariel Henley. Let's give it up for them. Thank you. Back here. Let's try. That should be fine. Okay, thanks. Thanks for coming to Green Apple Books. I'm Cara. I'm the events coordinator here for Green Apple. I just wanted to tell you about a couple of events that we have coming up that you might be interested in as well, because I would be remiss if I did not do that as part of my job. This coming Monday, January 24th at 7 p.m. virtually, we're hosting Bill Hayes, author of Insomniac City, for his new book, Sweat, A History of Exercise. Bill's going to be in conversation with Bonnie Sue. It's a virtual event, so you can stay at home, get comfortable, pull up with a beverage of your choice, and listen to Bill and Bonnie. We're excited to have them. That's Monday, January 24th. And then next Thursday, January 27th at 7 p.m. Right here, where we are, at Sir O'Reilly is going to be here reading from his new collection of poetry called Herd Horde. We're excited to have him. He's lovely and talented, and he's going to be here. That's next Thursday, January 27th at 7 p.m. All of our events are free unless stated otherwise, and you can check those out online at greenapplebooks.com. That being said, given the aforementioned free circumstances, please do buy books if you can. Please do buy them from us if you can. We're a bookstore in San Francisco. If you've been here before, you've heard me say that when you buy books from us, you support not only us as a store, but also it goes into putting on events such as these, and you support the authors who have put so much work into writing these books. And then you get to have a book, which is maybe the best part. So if you can, please do buy books. I can think of at least 2 books that you can pick up this evening. One bit of housekeeping before we get going. Please do keep your masks on at all times. I know we checked vaccinations as well, but we're just being extra careful given the Omicron surge. We're trying to keep ourselves and everyone safe, and also to give our authors tonight the grace to not have to keep their masks on while they're on the mic, and a little bit more comfortable for them. So thank you for being cool about it, much appreciated. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce the folks that are joining us this evening on either side of me. Zara Stone is an award-winning journalist. She's published with outlets such as The Atlantic, Vice, Wired, Wall Street Journal, BBC, and has worked as an on-air reporter for Fusion, a nationally syndicated ABC News affiliate. Stone's affiliations include the San Francisco Writers Grotto, heck yeah, the Authors Guild, and she's also been a judge for the News and Documentary Emmys for the last 4 years. Tonight, we're celebrating her book, Killer Looks, The Forgotten History of Plastic Surgery in Prisons. Give it up for Zara. On my right is Ariel Henley, who's a writer from Northern California with a BA in English and Political Science from the University of Vermont. She's passionate about writing as a form of activism and hopes to use her story to promote mainstream inclusion for individuals with physical differences. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and Narratively. Tonight, we are celebrating her debut, A Face for Picasso. Please welcome Ariel.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you to everyone who has taken the time to come out and everyone online who is spending the evening with us. It really means a lot.
Yeah, we appreciate you kind of being here on Friday night. So
yeah, absolutely. To start, we're just going to kind of give a brief overview of each of our books.
Yeah, you go
okay,
first.
Cool. So my book is a memoir. It's called A Face for Picasso. It's about my identical twin sister and me growing up with Crouzon syndrome. It's like crouton, but with a Z. Everyone always asks how to spell it, so there you go. It's a craniofacial condition where the bones in the head fuse prematurely. So we were diagnosed when we were 8 months old. By the time we were 18 years old, we had each undergone about 60 surgical procedures each. These changed the appearance of our faces. So even though we were once identical twins, we grew up really not looking like ourselves or each other anymore. And so I explore these experiences and unpack them through the lens of being compared to a Picasso painting in an international magazine when we were children. So that's kind of the overview of what my story is about.
And yeah, my book is pretty different kind of in what it's about, but the reason we're here together is we share some of the same themes about kind of bias and appearance and just not conforming to society's expectations. So Killer Looks is a nonfiction book that looks at the history of plastic surgery in prisons. That's been about 500,000 plastic surgeries starting kind of the early 1900s all the way up to 1995. And these kinds of surgeries majority of them were cosmetic, like faceless, eyeless, nose job. Some were reconstructive work, but a lot of it was the idea that making somebody appear, more cosmetically attractive would really help them, stop them from reoffending, and would also, curb recidivism and improve their lives. And kind of the bigger themes at work here is really how this kind of appearance bias permeates society, and the way in which kind of the justice system is structured in terms of prison reform. And I think to kind of get you started, we're going to both read a little passage, and then we'll gonna have more of a conversation.
Okay. So I am going to read from the end of chapter 2 on page 44. And so our faces were like masks we couldn't remove, because even if we could have gone back to the way we were before, it would have meant more surgery. And so the fear of surgery was always there, taunting us, a reminder of what was, what had been, and what could be, a reminder of who we were and who we would never be again.
And I am going to just a short snippet from page 100. So approximately 95% of all prisoner beautification surgeries were performed exclusively on men. There were no published studies at all about recidivism benefits of surgery on female inmates. It seemed really strange for the New York City's Corrections Commissioner, Anna Cross, especially accounting for the growing body of research that suggested around 70% of female inmates suffered from low self-esteem and a poor self-image, whereas only 40% of incarcerated men felt like that. One of the few prisons that focused on improving women's physical appearances lay 40 miles north of Manhattan in Bedford Hills. Since 1961, plastic surgeons from the University of Rochester had tracked to the 264-acre Westfield State Farm for Women, where they treated the women's various complaints, straightening noses, removing tattoos, and clearing their acne. Earlier that year, a popular author, Catherine Perry, visited a farm for research for her next book and talked to people there. The major problem is a public acceptance of a parolee, the superintendent informed her. Few places want to hire her. She explained that the surgeries helped with the women's so-called cosmetic imperfections, which had a knock-on effect with their job prospect. Fish had strict rules about what makeup was appropriate. Eyeshadow and mascara were a no-no, as they could appear trashy, but lipstick and hairstyling, natural colors only, were approved. We want them to go out of here looking like ladies.
So to kind of just jump in to talking about these books, we were going to talk first about plastic and cosmetic surgery and kind of the difference there. And so I was just kind of wondering, your book covers surgery that falls under both plastic and cosmetic surgery buckets, cleft palate surgery, as well as facelifts. And so how did the prison system differentiate between them? Today, are plastic surgeries for medical reasons like breast reconstruction after cancer available for prisoners?
So kind of going back to the origins of these programs, this was at a time when plastic surgery really wasn't the field it is today. Like, it's a field that, with each World War, plastic surgeons got kind of more understood more what to do, and their craft really evolved. So at the time, they weren't really separating the idea of plastic and cosmetic surgery. But over time, it evolved and, to kind of the medical side and the cosmetic side. And they really had rules about, facelifts, nose jobs, and it varied based on the different prisons. Some were like, we're only going to offer this to people who are going to be paroled within a year. Some of them will give it to everybody, because even if you have a life sentence, if you have a self-esteem boost, the idea was you're still going to be kind of happier with the surgery. But today, none of this really occurs. I mean, we do have some plastic surgery in prisons, but really it's for medical use only. And even then, in the case of trans surgeries, it's often hotly contested. Like, people aren't happy about this. And pretty much most of the prisons for people with breast cancer, they don't offer breast reconstruction at all. And I think in Texas, something like in 2017, I think maybe 50 of like 300,000 inmates were given dentures because, and I think this is a quote, like, chewing is like not a life necessity. So the medical care really isn't there anymore. And kind of looking at your book, in A Face for Picasso, in some cases it's not always clear like which of the surgeries were for cosmetic reasons and which were for medical reasons. And how did this kind of impact your writing when you were kind of looking into this?
Yeah, so growing up, it was never really clear what was medically necessary versus what was just, oh, this will make you look more normal. So I really didn't know the difference. And so going through the writing process, it was really eye-opening to go through years and years and literally thousands of pages of medical records and look through, medical notes and summaries and realize I didn't actually know what had been done to me, which is kind of a certain kind of trauma by itself, I think. And so that was really eye-opening in a lot of ways, I think. And to realize that the appearance aspect of my condition and growing up not looking the way most people do took precedence over, I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to articulate this, I guess. It's like, it was so important to fix us and to correct our appearance, and that was sort of how it was talked about, and those were the terms that were used in our medical records, and so it was like the psychological impact of that wasn't really addressed, and so the difference between those kinds of operations, cosmetic versus plastic surgery, wasn't even differentiated, because it was like, no, this is important, we'll address everything else later. Let's just fix this. It was all encompassing, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, there was a point in your book, I think, kind of near the end, where there was a surgery that kind of seemed purely cosmetic, and you kind of ultimately decided not to go for that. Kind of what was that?
And that was one of the only ones, I think, and that was when I was 18. But from the time I was 8 months old through being majority of being a teenager, it really wasn't clear. It was like, well, this is just what we're doing. And I'm, in a lot of ways, I think I'm glad I didn't know what was and wasn't medically necessary, because then I didn't have to decide. Because like the surgery that I talk about at the end of the book, it's hard to decide, okay, do we go with the physically painful route and correct these things, or do we go with the emotionally painful route and deal with the consequences of not correcting these things? So there really is no win. So I don't know, kind of a complicated question.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so in Killer Looks, and this is kind of, jumping into the idea of consent, you detail how thousands of prisoners received free cosmetic surgery, and how did this influence their life once they were released? ethically, could prisoners really consent to surgeries while they were incarcerated?
So I guess I'll start with the consent part. And no, I don't think you can really consent while you're incarcerated. I think the power dynamic is, too strong one way. And, in some of the cases of, prisoners choosing to have cosmetic surgery, some, in most cases, these were surgeries done by like plastic surgeons. They were altruistic reasons. But in around 25% of cases, these were kind of in conjunction with universities and like residency training schools, which doesn't mean the residents weren't, qualified and like weren't trying to do a good job, but they were also motivated by wanting to do XYZ surgeries so they could kind of check them off their list. And in these cases, occasionally there were reports of, people being bribed with like opioids. You get a nose job, we'll give you extra of these, or a packet of cigarettes if you come and you have a facelift. And also in a bunch of cases, people who chose to have cosmetic surgery, it was just factored into their parole hearings. So it would be like so-and-so, he's been doing really well. He's been in education classes. He had a nose job. And these were real reasons that went before the parole board and were given, in terms of like letting people out. And I just think, when you have this and you're talking about operations and cutting up somebody's body, this is not a good situation to be in. Like I think, in some cases, like there's this very big study about in New York from Rikers Island, where while people were on Rikers, they got screened and psychologically tested, but all operations happened when they were released. Like that is something I could see still happening. I mean, it doesn't still happen, but that would be the ethical way to do it. Like in that way, you're not really having people in an environment where, saying yes or no can be tied to a bunch of other factors. I'm trying to remember the first part of the question now.
Yeah, how did it influence your life once they were released?
So that's really interesting. I mean, the idea all behind this was that, by improving somebody's appearance, it would curb recidivism, and then and now it's a massive problem. I think it's something like 75% of people who are released from prison will reoffend within like 3 to 5 years. They call this the revolving door, and anything that can, help this would be great. And America in general is not great with, medical and social and welfare services. So the idea is that, by giving people cosmetic surgery, it would be kind of a couple of different things. Like, so first of all, it would boost self-esteem. You feel better about yourself. You act better. You have kind of a healthier, way that you're looking at the world. And then you have the way that people are responding to you. Like the beauty bias is real. There's so much documentation about if you're considered more attractive, you're more likely to get, a better job. You're more likely to be paid more. Even in school from a young age, teachers will give you more attention. And so it was the idea that this bias, which, kind of often, it doesn't have to be an economic bias, but often they kind of come together because, somebody who has more money, it does not necessarily make them genetically more attractive, but they have access to healthcare. They have access to grooming products, like all these like little signifiers that, kind of create this appearance of beauty as we see it. And so by giving people when they're released, it was one way to help them get a job. And getting a job is considered one of the best ways to kind of help people stay out of prison, especially a job with prospects. So not just necessarily like a wait staff worker who couldn't go anywhere, but something with a career trajectory. And getting a job when you have a criminal record is difficult. And getting a job when you have a criminal record and you have facial scars makes it even harder. And so the idea was that by doing this, it would help supplant that. And in many cases it did. Like there's a number of records of, people who were released, they had surgery, they got a job, their lives went well. There's also stories of people who, they had surgery and actually in some cases, they did improve their jobs, but they were, they just actually committed a higher level of crime. So they kind of went from like, breaking into cars to like credit card fraud. So, technically kind of also an improvement, but not the ones they were aiming for.
was that, sorry, piggybacking off of that, was that because like, or I don't know, did them having plastic surgery and maybe being more attractive make it harder for them to get caught? Does that make sense? Was there,
I think there could be a little of that, like, you're more able to kind of talk your way out of things. But I think a lot of it was related to, you have more, I guess, kind of pride in your own appearance. And so maybe you're committing higher levels of crimes that before you could confidently do.
Yeah, I was just curious if there was any studies done on that. That would be really interesting to me, just because just tying into the whole beauty bias and just seeing what people who are attractive could get away with if they were reoffending. I don't want to just assume that people are reoffending, but I don't know.
I know, and
Anyway.
it's interesting. I mean, especially because you look at like entrepreneurs, right, in San Francisco, and a lot of the same qualities that make someone a good entrepreneur are exactly the same ones as somebody who often commits a crime. Just like one is kind of seen this way, one goes the other way, which kind of often goes back to economic status. And I think let's see. And so I guess while we're kind of talking about bias and kind of how this works, I think in the book you kind of, and this I thought was really, when I was reading, I found this very moving, kind of how you were grappling. And in the book, you're exploring the difference between kind of hating your own appearance and then hating your appearance because you're conditioned to believe that you're supposed to. Can you kind of talk a bit about that and how that felt?
Yeah, so as a kid, I did not, I don't know, I was just a normal kid. I just had surgery and my face changed sometimes. I didn't dislike what I looked like. I just wanted to play and do normal childlike things, I guess. But it was so ingrained in me to feel othered. And so by the time I started to become more aware of the fact that I was different and, oh, okay, wait, no, I should feel this way. I started to internalize how other people saw me and how other people felt about me. And so it really became a matter of not hating myself because I truly hated myself, but because I thought I was supposed to. And then really just eventually truly believing that and wanting to change because I understood or thought I understood that life and everything about my experience in the world would get better if I conformed and was just like everybody else around me. And so it was really difficult to be, I don't know, I didn't have memories as young as 4 and 5, even younger actually, and crying about my appearance. And to be 4 and to wake up from surgery and my face has changed and to say, I want my old face back. I want my old face back. As a almost 31-year-old woman, that's kind of, I laugh because I'm so far from that experience now that it feels like a different person and it just feels so bizarre to me and kind of mind-blowing that was my reality. And to think that as a little girl, I grew up being taught by the world that just for existing, I was so wrong and ugly and everything about me was inherently bad. That's heartbreaking to me. Yeah, and so a lot of the, I feel like I'm going on a tangent. I don't remember the actual question. I'm just talking now.
Well, I guess kind of going off what you just said, and about kind of feeling that from the outside world. And I mean, I've read the book, but like, for people who haven't, can you talk about, the bias you experienced?
Yeah, so I mean, it everything from going to the store with my mom, it was being constantly stared at. Again, even as a little kid, constantly being stared at, constantly being made fun of, being treated like there was something wrong with me or like I was gross. In school, I was definitely targeted by teachers, people that you would think are supposed to look out for especially children were often the ones who were not, and which isn't actually all that surprising because I mean, disability statistics show that a lot of people who actually abuse people with disabilities are caregivers. And luckily, like, I mean, that was never the case for me. I have wonderful parents and family members, but it was people who were in roles like teachers and coaches who really did not stand up for me and who were not there to offer support. In school, if I had to miss classes for surgery, I was often marked down. There was no way to make it up. And so I would fail participation. And so sometimes I'd get a C minus. I'd have A's and everything else for the class. And then so I'd have to get like a C minus in the class overall, simply because I could not physically be in the seat like the other students. But you think about that, it sounds kind of minor, but then think about, okay, end of high school, what scholarships could I have been eligible for? What colleges could I have gone to? I love the college I went to, but I'm just saying, like, there are opportunities then that people are not able to get because of that. I was a cheerleader, which I know is surprising. I don't look like a cheerleader. That was fun. The actual experience of dancing was great. People were not nice. And so I continued to do it to prove a point. And so that bias was very much present in that experience from teammates, again, coaches, football players, everyone. So again, it really has impacted every aspect of my life, from opportunities that I get, jobs that I've been able to hold, how much money I make. Like you mentioned, the beauty bias is so real, and it is hard to explain exactly how impactful it is, in a way that makes people actually listen and want to change things, because people are like, get over it, it's fine. But there are, I don't know, it's like there are barriers that just, no matter what you do, don't go away. Again, even today, I cannot go to the store, I cannot go out to eat at a restaurant without getting stared at. I go out with my boyfriend, people hand me a coloring like menu, like I'm a child. It's demeaning, it's infantilizing. And these are things that, again, occurred from the time I was little and was a kid, and up till now, and it hasn't stopped. So I'd say surgery has helped in some ways, but it really didn't end. So I think that's where the societal change has to come in.
No, for sure. And I mean, I think, the correlations people draw between kind of appearance and character is just, we think it's ridiculous, right? But then it's still happening. And I mean, I think we can, date this if we want to like go religious, you can date it to biblical times, and in the Bible, people who were like disfigured weren't allowed to enter the temple or considered profane. And then you kind of had like, the early 19th century, like lots of kids were just locked up and put away because they were considered different. And then, I mean, going into eugenics, which is a whole pile of.
Yeah, and the ugly laws.
Oh, gosh.
Which like was really illegal. And that was, and disfigurement and facial difference was so linked with social economic standing that it was like homelessness and disfigurement all grouped into one. And so it was like, I don't know, the assumption that if you had a facial difference, you were going to be homeless because there were no opportunities for you. And that, what was it, 1970? That it was in Chicago,
the last place
one.
And the ugly laws were these laws that I think were in every state and a lot of cities where, if you were considered ugly, and they had like different kind of definitions of this, you often weren't even allowed out to be in public, or you could just be arrested for being outside. And yeah, I mean, these literally till the 1970s, like these were still like on the books in different like places.
and it's so easy to think like it doesn't affect us, or it's not like that here. It started in San Francisco. So sit with that.
And, you know, some of this stuff, of course, like, you know, it intersects kind of with racism and sexism.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, there's like a lot of the isms, I think. I mean, I guess for what we're talking about, this kind of comes under the banner of lookism, which is kind of appearance-based discrimination.
And ableism too, I would say.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the conditions that fall under lookism would also count as a disability. Not all, of course, because sometimes people just aren't symmetrical. It's not a disability if you're not completely symmetrical.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of things that should be better. I mean, I think even legally, right, kind of when you're looking like, can we like legislate against this, and like, what is there? You know, lookism is really like not covered. You know, like, you know, ageism, sexism, a bunch of other, you know, things are, but apart from like, I think 1 or 2 places, which is randomly Santa Cruz and the province of Victoria in Australia, you know, if you're fired because you're not considered pretty, and, you know, you don't have any other kind of disability that protects you, they can just fire you. You know, they don't have to give an excuse or a reason. There really isn't anything protecting you. And it's an area that people have been kind of really wary actually about legislating. And, you know, this kind of comes under like, well, you know, if this is a thing, like, you know, can we still hire like models to, you know, who are really like small, slim and tall? And, you know, models is a whole separate problematic idea of kind of how society kind of venerates certain body shapes and faces. Yeah. I think though there are some things, because I know, you know, this is a lot of kind of, these are difficult things to hear. There are some people who are kind of making progress in a good way. There's a charity called Changing Faces.
Yes, love Changing Faces. Sorry, go ahead.
So this is a British charity, and one of the things in terms of, you know, kind of changing the narrative about appearance is how appearance, you know, representation is in the movies and in books, right? So, I mean, you know, like tradition is the wrong word, historically, you know, you have like facial scars, you know, hunchbacks, all these things are used generally like to denote like ugliness of character. And then, you know, kids grow up with these kind of things conflated. And so one of the things Changing Faces did in 2018, working with the British Film Institute, it will no longer fund any movies where, you know, a main character has a facial scar and is evil, if that's literally the only reason. And I mean, you know, it's a good start. You know, it's still not everything. Like I think James Bond from last year, like the villain had a facial scar, and the reason for it, the backstory was, you know, like not super necessary or convincing. So these are still, and you know, movie like directors, they're using this as like, oh, it's easy. This just translates to this. But you know, it might be easy, but it's lazy. And kind of today we really need to be better than that.
Absolutely. Kind of transition. I know you touched on this, just said something about models, and I just kind of wanted to talk about appearance bias a little bit more. I know we talked about this a little bit, but we're told not to judge people by appearances despite constant feedback to the contrary with Insta filters and models, and the body positivity movement tries to reframe this into all bodies are beautiful, but the emphasis is still on bodies and beauty. Do you find the lack of discussion around lookism privilege harmful?
I think it's absolutely harmful. I think, you know, like researchers I've spoken to, you know, psychologists, they tell me like this is a very underfunded area. Like, you know, of all the different kind of sociology avenues they go to, people are really wary to put money on this. And some of this is because, you know, you go too much into appearance. I think, you know, there's the idea of kind of eugenics gets kind of like linked to it, even if, you know, that's not what the research is about, which is one of the reasons it's wary. But, you know, it's the whole idea that like, you know, not talking about it, like doesn't solve the problem. Like, I think, I can't remember, I watched like some TV show the other day and they had like all the contestants, like have to stand in order of attractiveness, and they had to like look at each other and make these judgments. And, you know, this is still stuff we're doing today, and we're kind of figuring that out. And yeah, and like I think, you know, the studies, right? Like we touched on this already, like more attractive people. But it's something like you're gonna earn something like $350,000 more over your lifetime than someone who's considered less attractive. You're more likely to get a lower sentence in court. You know, you're more likely to have your case dismissed, apart from if you were a sex worker, which is something separate.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's just.
I think in that case, they're like, well, if you're attractive, then you're using that to be a better sex worker, or I don't know, judges have all this different stuff. But there is like a lot of really shocking things, like you mentioned schools, right? So there's stuff how, you know, teachers give more attention to the more attractive kids. You know, they grade them, you know, if a kid is, you know, he acts out, you know, he's spirited. And if somebody considered less attractive acts out, oh, they're a troublemaker. So it's just these like tiny little signifiers that really create this like deep lasting thing in the psyche of, you know, the kids and the kids around them, and like what is considered okay and it's not okay.
Oh, really, really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about your book cover?
Sure. Yeah, so I think let's both hold our covers up. Sure. Very, very different. I think mine is kind of, black and yellow, and these are some before and after pictures of people, I think, for who had like nose jobs and chin implants. I think the top ones are San Quentin prison, and these I think are Joliet in Chicago. And I think when we were talking about our covers, we were saying how like ending up at this cover, you know, when you're working with a publisher, it's a process, and it's not always necessarily the way you want it to work out. So I think, you know, my book, the title sounds kind of, you know, flashy, but it's like really more of a kind of a thoughtful look at appearance bias. And I was a little worried this looked a little tabloidy.
I like it though. It draws me in.
Well, it's growing on me.
Yeah.
So it's just a good thing. A good thing.
I
And
mean to like devalue your feelings. You know.
no, I appreciate it. I mean, and you're literally on your cover. That has to be like, how did that come about?
This was kind of a big moment for me personally, because I did not grow up seeing books with myself. Well, obviously not myself on them. That's weird. But people like me, I'm sorry, on them. I didn't get to really see, you know, there wasn't any representation is what I'm trying to say. And so when I did get a book deal, one of the things I talked to my agent about was that it was really important to me to have a say in the cover, because as you so perfectly mentioned, there's so many harmful tropes and stereotypes, and the portrayal of facial difference and disfigurement is just horrible. And I was like, the last thing I want is to write a memoir that I've always dreamed of writing and then have a super offensive cover. And so one of the things that was part of the deal was that I could have kind of a say. But anyway, they sent me a few options, and so they let me be pretty involved in kind of picking the artist, which I appreciated. And then at first, the initial designs were like the back of my head with the drawing over it. And then I was like, actually, and like they looked really cool, they did. But then I was like, actually, can we have like a face on there? Because, you know, again, representation. And so we went through a bunch of rounds, and then they sent this one, and I was like, yeah, that one. And a mom of a little girl with a craniofacial condition, after my book came out, sent me a photo of her daughter holding my book in a Barnes and Noble. And I just like started like sobbing at my computer. So I'm really glad that I'm on it. And I was like, it doesn't have to be me. It can be my twin sister. It can be someone else. Like, it doesn't matter. Just a facial difference person or craniofacial condition, something like, I don't know. Just normalize it. And I didn't want it to be like, look at me. Like, I just think it's tasteful, and I don't know. I don't feel weird to be like, I feel like I look pretty here. I don't care if that's weird to say. like I wanted it to be pretty. I didn't want it to be like, look at my asymmetrical face and have it be, I don't know, drawing people in that way, if that makes sense. So, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have like a photo shoot or did you send them?
Yeah. Paul No took the photo and he actually worked with my twin sister. It took he was a friend. And so we did a few rounds of photo shoots. And so I got to feel like a celebrity on several different occasions, which was a lot of fun. I was like, let's do more.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, because our books are so much kind of about appearance, I think when we were talking about it, we're like, what it looks like does send a message to people.
Yeah. Did you get to did you go back and forth with the designer at all, or did they just say, here, this is the one we're going with?
Well, the first one they sent me was a picture I didn't have the rights to. Which I'd shown them with like, we don't have the rights to this, and then they like used it, and I was like, no, like that doesn't work.
Oh no. Okay.
And so we went back and forwards a little, but yeah, not a huge amount.
You did it.
Yeah, no, we get books.
All that matters is printed. We're done.
Yeah.
Yay.
And I guess we can like open for questions if people have stuff they'd like to ask us.
I am so sorry. I have no idea what you just said.
I will. What would you like your teachers to have done?
Yeah, so sorry, what would I have liked for teachers to have done to support?
Support you, and also what would be for youth today? What would help?
Oh, okay, thank you. I think at the time was not pretending like it wasn't a thing. And being okay with absences and being flexible, being understanding, being empathetic and compassionate, normalizing that, you know what, sometimes children have to go out and have operations or have a medical condition. I think normalizing accommodations in general is great. Humans have needs. It's okay to have needs, we all do. And so to just kind of normalize meeting those needs goes a really long way. I think it tells students and just kids in general that they matter and their needs matter, and that they are important. Yeah, and to kind of give kids the flexibility to make up the work, if that makes sense, as they can. Yeah, I think that would have gone a really long way, and just being patient and understanding. But I think the attendance piece is a really big one that sticks with me. I'm like, I can't be there. Like, I don't know what you want me to do. So yeah, so I think just talking to students, and you meet one person with Crouzon syndrome, you meet one person with Crouzon syndrome. I have different needs than someone else is going to have. And so recognizing that and talking to them and seeing what they need and what will be helpful for them is really the key. That's a great question.
Oh, sorry, you had a question?
Yeah. What did you find that the prison system was happy to have you do this book, or were they somewhat resistant to talk to you and have this become publicized so people knew this had been happening in prison?
Well, I mean, I'd say the people who had worked in the prisons and, were now retired, because a lot of the people I spoke to were, in their 80s and some even in their 90s. They were really happy to talk. But the Bureau of Prisons today and the different prisons, state prisons in America, were not super forthcoming. Like, I would ask for information and they would stonewall me, and I would file a FOIA, a Freedom of Information request, and then I would do another one and another one. So, just trying to because in the Bureau of Prisons manual today, there is a provision for elective cosmetic surgery I think the proviso being, if it's for the good of like mental health or needs of a person, but it can only be done if it's like signed off by like XYZ. And so I was like, have there been any sign-offs by these people in the last couple of years or however long years? And they've just got the runaround. I think eventually I got from Texas and it was like, nope, we haven't had any in like forever. And so that was helpful. But yeah, the prisons were, not super kind of, I don't think they never really said, we don't want you doing this, but they weren't encouraging. Sure.
So I have a question for you, Ariel. So where do you think that you get your strength from?
My strength.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think to me, I don't know. I think everything that I've experienced in life is things I had to deal with. It's not like I had a choice, if that makes sense. And I'm very lucky and very privileged. I grew up with an amazing family. My sister, my parents, my siblings, even my surgeons, everyone was very, and is very kind and loving and patient. And even when things haven't or weren't handled in a way that, I don't know, people would handle the same way now, people were willing to learn and reflect. And I guess everyone's just kind of been willing to learn and grow and change. And so being able to watch the people around me be resilient and to go through life and hard things with grace and strength and courage, I guess. I try to do my best. I have not always handled things in the best way. I was very angry as a kid and teenager. That anger will always be, I think, my default emotion. I find it very easy. Because, underneath that is like the sadness and the fear and things like that. So I don't think I always was strong. I think a lot of times I was not, but I tried to be. And I think that's all we can do, is even when we have our weak days or our weak moments, is try to be strong the next day.
You talked about the difference between plastic surgery and cosmetic surgery. And especially with the killer looks, it's interesting that I initially thought it would be something like maybe they have deviated some stuff and they can't breathe, but then I read that they're doing breast augmentations and things that are just essentially beautification. And so I'm wondering, where do they draw that line? Did they draw the line, or was it just like handing out the surgery, whatever anybody wanted? How did they choose?
So this kind of varied, based on the prison, but a lot of prisons would have a screening process. So, first, like a person would have to kind of go through psychological tests to, make sure they were, ready to handle surgery, and they understood that, all surgery comes with scars and other issues like that. And then they also went through the physical test where the surgeons would examine them. And often they were graded on kind of a 1 to 4 scale. For, I think it was like minimum, moderate, marked, and gross. I think that was a technical term then, not like it is now. And you had to, at least be a 2 or 3 or 4 to be accepted into that program. And so, they kind of did have some checks and balances in place. There were some places, like in Utah, for example, where there's stories of like everybody had a breast implants if they wanted them. And those are kind of that one actually got closed down after a little bit of a scandal. So people did try to have kind of some screening, and they weren't always great ones.
Just curious what for both of you, what your thoughts are on the pairing of emotional and psychological support in combination with something like a surgery, especially for groups who may not have fully the understanding or consent for these surgeries, like visitors or kids who are too young.
Sure. So your question was kind of how did the emotional and kind of psychological effect kind of tying with surgery for kind of prisoners who might not have understood it, or for kids who didn't understand kind of consent or as much what it meant. Why don't you start?
Yeah, sorry, just kind of, are you asking how, sorry, how the psychological and, sorry, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm having like a brain block. Can you like just repeat?
And you phrased it a lot better than when I paraphrased it. So.
Oh, I was just curious, like, for things like these surgeries, do you think that it is something that could always come with like emotional and psychological support as well, or is this
Yes.
is sort of a case by case type thing?
Yes, sorry, thank you. That is a great question. Yes, I think it should absolutely come with emotional and psychological support. I think especially when it's a kid who doesn't know what's going on, and you don't have the ability to say, yes, you can do this to me. And even if you do, you have no idea what recovery is going to look like. You don't know what you're agreeing to. You don't have the ability to understand. And that isn't anyone's fault, really. Sometimes surgeries are necessary and it has to be done. Like, I know I've had surgeons who feel terrible doing surgeries of that we need in order to stay alive. And that was just the reality of it. But yes, it takes such a huge psychological toll. And there are kids who have PTSD as a result of this. And so meeting that emotional need and kind of addressing the psychological impact head on from the start, I think will be very validating for those patients and do a lot so that they can work on that as they experience it and not, reach their 30s and be like, oh, okay, now let's go back and undo 30 years of trauma that I didn't realize was there, So yes, I absolutely think it should be. And to be fair, I think mental health care has come a long way since I was a kid, for example. It's still a long way to go. But I know, for me, for example, like, I think surgeons were so focused on, okay, let's just do these, we'll deal with everything else later. It's kind of like the triage approach, but we're realizing like mental health is health, and so I think that's been really helpful as well.
And kind of when it comes to prisons, yes, there absolutely should be. And so, there were many operations, and in some cases, there were kind of psychologists that they spoke to, but these were normally these studies, the ones where they we want to take a sample size and we want to follow them for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and see their recidivism rate. Because at the beginning, a lot of this was, anecdotal, like, oh, we think it has an effect, but we don't know. And then in the 60s, there started to be a lot of studies looking into this, and kind of psychologists were bundled in. And before that, they weren't really, and it never became something that was common. But one of the reasons for that is, I think in New York in 1967 or something, it was something like 4 psychiatrists for 10,000 people, and it's just like you just don't have treatment when those are the numbers of people you're expected to treat. And I think even now there is a massive deficit of psychiatrists in the prison community. Like the amount of people they're able to see just kind of basically means the care is pretty useless because it's not really going to give you the kind of thing you need.
What motivated you to write a book? It was quite courageous. You took something parts of your life and decided you wanted to tell a story and had to sell it to a publisher. What was that like?
I decided that I wanted to write a book when I was 12 years old. After a summer where my sister and I had 2 particularly traumatic surgeries. And it was also the summer that I found, or around the time that I found an article that had been written a couple of years before that compared our faces to a Picasso painting, which I found just really insulting. Because it was, cubism, eye over here, nose over here. And I thought that was just super rude. And I didn't like that at all. And I was bruised and bandaged and in pain and just generally kind of mad. And I went back to school, and seventh grade is already kind of terrible as it is. So going back to seventh grade when you look different is twice as fun, I think. And anyway, I had a short story assignment for a class, and the teacher said we could write about whatever we wanted. And I kept finding that anytime I tried to write about something, it was always my story in disguise. And so, and obviously this is a very adult interpretation of how it went. But basically, I turned in the assignment and I got an A. And on the homework assignment, my teacher said, you might have a future as a short story writer. It was very encouraging. And I was just feeling very lost and everything felt completely pointless. And so I really hung on to that. And so for years, I was like, I'm going to write a book. And so when things were terrible, or felt really hard and terrible and meaningless and pointless, I just was like, another story for the book. And so for me, it was my way of showing up for life. And so when I didn't want to go to something, or if I didn't want to do something, or if I was depressed, or whatever it was, or even if I was just having a great time and life was great, I would just document everything and make a note of it, because like I mentioned earlier, there weren't any stories about people like me, and I wanted there to be. And so I decided I would write the book that I wished I had.
One more question. Online for both of you. That's alternative text is what was a text that you should read that was influential in writing your own piece?
A text that we read that was influential in writing our book. That was Autobiography of a Face by Lucy Greeley. Yeah, that book. If she was alive today, I would tell her how incredible her work was.
That is a good book. I remember reading that in college and just crying.
Yeah.
For me, that is. I'm trying to think now. There was a really large. Well, I guess the biggest thing for me when I was reporting this is kind of midway through. I got this really big document. I guess about 100 pages, and it was a printed study of the surgical and social rehabilitation of adult offenders. And this was from the 1967 Rikers Island study. And it was just like page after page. And, they had like details of, like here is somebody who, they like fell in love with their nurse and they got married. And like, here is a story about, a guy who like wanted it, but he didn't want to give up his job working in the mess hall. And he'd have had to take time off for all the appointments. And so I think that was just this like, when I got this text and so, you have all the data, but then you also have the personal narratives. I think that was when, I think, that was when I kind of realized like, this is just something really big that I have here, more than just, kind of maybe something smaller and quirkier and magazine-y. And I guess this time.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming out.
Yeah.
For everyone's Zara, please. And I'm super appreciative of you all for joining us. I'm just here to tell you that we have both of these authors' books for sale at the front. And is it safe to assume that you will sign them for our party? They're going to sign the books. So meet us at the back desk where my colleague Max is. Hi, Max. And they will do that for you. Thank you for joining us. Make yourselves at home. It's okay. Yeah.